Welcome to Advocacy Arena, the place we bring awareness and solution oriented focus to issues. Today I am here interviewing Dr. Mary Marshall, and Dr. Marshall is a historian, African American and women's history, genealogy, researcher, writer, lover of music, art, and photography. She is also the curator and custodian of the Mary Marshall Collection at Emory University. So, good afternoon, Dr. Marshall. Thank you for joining me here today. I want to give you an opportunity to just say hello, and we'll get right started with our questions.
Well, good afternoon, Dee. It is wonderful to hear you, and I'm excited, looking forward to our conversation. I will do my best to be short. You know how long winded I can get. So
Well, it's
I
fine
will,
by me.
but I will do my best.
All right. Well, let's get started. I would love for people to get to know you a little better. I have come to know you over the last year and always, you know, just inspired by your work, your wisdom, and always learning new things about you. So I would like to have people who are listening to the podcast get to know you a little bit. So tell us a little bit about your childhood, like where you grew up and some things about your childhood.
Okay. Good afternoon, everybody. I am Dr. Mary Marshall. I was born in Augusta, Georgia, and I spent really the first 12, 13 years of my life going back and forth between Augusta and New York. I like to tell people that I was the child of parents who were in the military, which of course is definitely not true. I do know that my father was um, in the army for a short time, but I use that description because my siblings and I spent winters in Augusta with my grandparents. And as soon as school was out, my grandmother or my grandmother usually would take us to New York to be with my mother. My parents had separated. And we typically stayed until Labor Day. On Labor Day, my mother would bring us back to Augusta. And that was the cycle for the first 12, 13 years of my life.
Okay.
When my older sister graduated from high school, by that time, my grandmother was really becoming, well, she was older and becoming more ill. So we all came to New York. I went through elementary and junior high school in Georgia, and I finished high school here in New York. And I studied music and dance from about 5, 6 years old until I graduated from high school. One might think that I would then study music and or dance in college, but my passion was always to write. I was a very easy child to buy presents for any time of the year. The thing I always wanted most was pencils and paper.
Okay.
Give me paper and pencils to write, and you had a happy kid on your hands. I spent the majority of my childhood and teenage years reading. I could always be found with a book. When I went to the library, both in Georgia and in New York, I generally left with a shopping bag full of books. At that time, you could take out more than two or three. And I was a voracious reader. So That was my early childhood.
Okay. Well, let's ease on into your university years, like where you went to university, that your studies, and your experience. A little bit about that.
My intention, excuse me, my intention when I became a senior in high school, I knew that my mother would not be able to pay for college. So my intention was to work full time and go to Long Island University part time. I had gone to one of their college fairs and I liked it. It was, I would have been commuting, but that to me was fine. That's what I needed to do, it's what I wanted to do. However, during that particular point in history in New York City, if you took the scholarship exam for any college, you typically would have the rest of the day off. Given that my mother and aunt worked at night, I didn't have a lot of time after school to meet up with friends, hang out. So I took every exam that was available so that when the exam was over, I would spend the rest of my time exploring Fifth Avenue. I loved antiques. I spent a lot of time in the village going into antique shops. I had grown up in a home that was full of antiques, so I knew a lot about antiques. And as a result of taking those tests, I won or was accepted at Howard University and several other colleges. I also won a scholarship from a separate organization. Having the money to attend college and being accepted at Howard meant I could actually go to school full time and I could go away. And that is how I ended up at Howard University. I did my undergraduate work there. I got a degree, a bachelor's degree in speech pathology, audiology, and English. I carried a double major because at the time, Howard did not have a department of speech. It had just started, but the Board of Trustees had not approved speech as a major. So I had a double major of speech and English with a minor in psych. Once I graduated and left Howard, I worked for a year as a speech therapist and experienced my first overt racist encounter. I decided that I had better find another kind of work. I just thought that I'm a very easygoing person, but being raised both in the South and in the North, I knew that there was racism on both ends. And it had been my experience. And I had come to the conclusion that racism in the North was worse insofar as in the South, whites would call you a name or say whatever they were going to say. You knew how they felt and they knew your response to the extent that you gave a response. Whereas in the North, if you recognized racism, prejudice, then it was subtle. And in my opinion, that was worse because someone that you might think is or was someone that you could communicate with, perhaps start a relationship with regard to friendship or perhaps a study partner in school or go into a restaurant and be seated at an acceptable place in the restaurant, not back by the bathroom.
Mm-hmm.
So I decided to go back to school, but I didn't want to start over in that I wanted to pursue a master's degree in a field that would allow me to use my undergraduate study. So
Mm-hmm.
I ended up studying reading development and got a master's from NYU
Mm-hmm.
in reading development. During my second semester, I had a conversation with one of my teachers to say that, I need a job, or at least I need one that pays better than the one I had. And she suggested teaching. Teaching was the last thing on my mind. I had come back to New York at a time when the public school system was in an uproar over community development and parental involvement. And I just didn't want to be caught up in all of that. But that wasn't what she had in mind. She explained that she thought I would make a great college teacher.
Okay.
That was not what I had in mind either, because all of my college teachers were much older than I,
Mm-hmm.
and I just couldn't see me teaching someone who was 18 or 19 or 20. However, it was a paying job, and I started out at New York Tech in Brooklyn teaching college study skills and English, and discovered that I absolutely loved it. I didn't have to call home and tell any student's parent that they didn't do their homework. I didn't have to worry about discipline. The thing that I discovered I had to be concerned about was that the students were not only 18 or 20, many of them were just coming back from Vietnam.
Mm-hmm.
And so there were students my own age. I was 24 at the time. And there were also students much older than I. And the faculty person who suggested that this would be a great career for me didn't tell me that I would have to fend off admirers. And so the first, I would get students that would come to my office for counseling or to discuss their classwork. And I just didn't understand why these particular men were coming, because they were my best students. And I'd scratch my head wondering what I did wrong or where I wasn't clear. And finally, one of them said, Miss Marshall, I would really like to take you to dinner. I was so caught off guard. Like, Mary, how could you miss this sign? I missed it because I wasn't looking for it. I was there to teach
Teach.
college study skills with a blend of English when necessary. So that meant I had to adjust. There were no computers then. There
Mm-hmm.
was no smart boards. There was chalk and the blackboard.
Right.
And what that made me do was try to stand sideways to write on the board and talk, because I realized that these guys, while they were listening and learning, they were also checking me out. And that made me extremely uncomfortable. Nevertheless,
Imagine.
I survived. I got my master's, and then I ended up getting a position I was offered positions at the City College of New York, at York College, and one other college. And at that time, City College was within walking distance practically from where I lived. So I started full time as a lecturer at City College. And I never ever thought that I would be a teacher or that I would love it so much, but I did. I still do. I
Mm-hmm.
don't anymore because I'm retired, but I really enjoyed my first 7 years. And it was 7 years at City. Unfortunately, the year that I might have been promoted to stay longer, New York City went bankrupt.
Oh,
And of course, I fell into the last hired, first fired.
right.
And that was really depressing,
Mm-hmm.
because while I knew that the school, the city. If you were a city employee, that's just the way it worked. However, I got a job later working with the adult education department of the city of New York. Eventually, I got another position working at an engineering college upstate New York, and moved into administration of minority student affairs and the higher education opportunity program. After doing that for a while, I decided that I should go back to school. I always wanted my doctorate. I just didn't know what I wanted it in.
Mm-hmm.
For a period, I was thinking of becoming a minister.
Mm-hmm.
So I actually did a few trial sermons, what they call trial sermons, at my home church in Georgia. And at one point, I realized that as much as I love the Lord and am a Christian and thought that that might be my life's work, it really was not for me.
Mm-hmm.
And if anything, it made me realize that teaching was what I wanted to do, and it wasn't from the pulpit.
Okay.
So when I went back to school, I decided to pursue a course in 19th century history, and with the focus on Lucy Craft Laney. She was an educator in Augusta who founded Haynes Normal and Industrial Institute. That was a school, a private school initially, but it became public in the sense that it was private and initially founded for girls. But Miss Lucy thought that she needed to open it up to the boys as well. She didn't like the idea that they were peeping in, wanting to be a part of it. So it became co ed. But it meant a lot to me because every person in my home in Georgia, male and female, had attended Haynes Institute. The earliest person would have been my grandmother, and actually, I think even my great grandmother took some courses there because Haynes also eventually had a pre college program.
Mm-hmm.
Miss Laney also established a nursing school. There were classes at night. So I grew up thinking that any moment Miss Laney would walk through the door. Of course, I knew that wasn't going to happen because I knew she was dead. However, the way people talked about her in the city, but especially in my home, if she had walked through the door, it would have shocked me. But I fell in love with the information I knew about this woman.
Mm-hmm.
I was also a member of Springfield Baptist Church, which is considered to be the oldest Black Baptist church in the country, although there is controversy. Some people think it's a church in Savannah.
Mm-hmm.
But as a kid, I'm not involved with controversy. I'm just going to Sunday school, spending all day in church because that's what you did at that point in time. You
Mm-hmm.
went to Sunday school, church, you went to Baptist training, youth service afterwards. I was in church from 8, 9 in the morning till 5, 6 at night. I'm very active in my church. So I proposed as a dissertation topic to write about the intellectual the intellectual community in Augusta, starting with Springfield Baptist Church, because out of Springfield Baptist Church, Morehouse College was founded there, the Georgia Equal Rights Association was founded there, and many well known people, including Bishop Henry Turner and others, had spoken there. So there was this history in my background that I just took for granted. My passion was writing, and it never occurred to me prior to pursuing a doctorate to look at history. But by that time, I was interested in women's history
Mm-hmm.
and particularly in Lucy Craft Laney. So my doctorate is partially on the intellectual community in Augusta and on Lucy Craft Laney.